Welcome back. Guess what? This is week 7. That's right, week 7. Man, I can't believe I've gone 7 weeks in a row. Week 7 of the Sense of Belonging series. I'm your host, Dr. Sheldon L. Eakins. I'm also the host of the Leading Equity Podcast, founder of the Leading Equity Center. By the way, if you're looking for back-to-school events, especially around sense of belonging, social emotional learning, I'm your guide, keynotes, trainings, workshops, things of that nature. If you've been following along with the channel, The Art of Advocacy, every week I've been coming out with more information from my upcoming book in regards to how to foster, how to cultivate a sense of belonging. You need to have 3 things. Students need to feel accepted, included, and supported. And that is the overarching thing that we've been talking about all this summer. And we're going to continue on beyond the summer. I just got a lot of content, a lot of material, a lot of research that's out there that I'm putting together. So thank you again for showing up for today's session. Feel free to say hello, put your comments in. I want to jump right into the slides because I have a lot that I want to cover. I'm really excited to cover today's topic today. So we are talking about tokenism, unveiling tokenism, the flip side of exclusion. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is I think it's really important because I think sometimes we unintentionally tokenize not just your students, because I'm going to talk about it from a student standpoint primarily, but I am going to also talk to my administrators and also my district folks for your staff as well when it comes to what tokenism could look like, what taxation could look like, what erasure can look like. So we're going to be talking about all of those things today. As a reminder, my current book that's out is Leading Equity, Becoming an Advocate for All Students. If you haven't picked it up, make sure you grab yourself a copy. And also shoot me an email, put it in the chat. If you have a sense of belonging topic that you would like for me to cover, let me know. I'll be happy to see if I can get it in the lineup for upcoming sessions that we have. All right, so quick overview of today's agenda. We're talking about the opposite of exclusion, the effects of tokenism, and then we're going to wrap things up. I always like to leave you with strategy. I don't like to just sit there and talk about the perils of education. No, that's not my vibes. All right, that's not how we do. All right, my goal here is to leave you with strategies as well. So that's what we'll wrap things up with. Okay, now just a real quick overview from last week. If you followed the session last week, and you can also just go into the channel. By the way, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel already. But last week we talked about exclusionary practices in schools, things that we do such as failing to decenter ourselves, the sage on the stage, which is, standing in front of the students and just talking lecture style, allowing kids to sleep in class, and everything. Oh my God, ain't nobody told me about my typo. Everything a child does is a form of communication. We talked about all of that last week. And some strategies that I left you was all about decentering ourselves. Okay, compliance versus communication. Allow students to check on you, allow students to check you, and then reality is relative. So that was last week. That's what we talked about. Again, you can watch the video from last week, that session. So I'm not going to dig too deep into that because, like I said, it's readily available. Let's move into the opposite. Okay, so all right, the opposite of excluding our children would be what? We're going to talk about it. Tokenism. Well, let's get into some definitions real quick. I like to give you some research. I don't want to just be talking out my behind. All right, it's not just what Dr. Eakins is saying. Let me move this banner out your way for just a second here. All right, tokenism, the practice of making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort to be inclusive, especially by including or recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups only to give the appearance of sexual, racial, and other forms of equality and fair treatment within a workforce or other space without any meaningful commitment to real inclusion and change. All right, this happens a lot. I'm gonna tell you a quick story about this here because this is real. Okay, when we're talking about tokenism, I kid you not, this is a true story. I was walking on a college campus once. I was an adult. I wasn't a student. I was a college, just someone that was working in a profession in which I was helping students get tours, helping our underserved students get access to college, and by giving them college tours, helping them out with financial aid and those kind of things, scholarships and all that. All right. So I'm on campus walking, minding my own business. And there was a photographer that came, was like, hey, come over here real quick. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'm seeing what's going on. And as I walk over there, there's a group of maybe 4 other students. And then one of the things that I noticed, again, being a person of color who's typically, again, I live in Idaho, so I'm typically in spaces that are predominantly white. And so I noticed, wow, this 5 other people, they're pretty diverse. You had different race, you had different, had gender, you had all these different things. And he's like, hey, I need you to take a picture with us. So I asked, well, why do you want me to take a picture? I'm happy to help or whatever, but what's the picture for? He says, this is going to be for our new marketing. Now, again, I live in Idaho. So I think you could imagine someone that lives in Idaho, if you're not familiar with the demographics, I mean, you could guess there is not a lot of racial diversity within this state. However, and I wasn't even a student. I wasn't even a student. I was just literally a random dude on campus, right? Walking their campus. But the idea was, let's take this picture with all these diverse individuals to show how diverse our campus is. But the reality of it is, let's keep it real. If I'm a potential candidate, like I'm applying for colleges and I see this publication, I see the pamphlet, and I see this picture. Oh, I'm thinking, oh, maybe this school is they're very welcoming, and there's this, I'm going to feel accepted, included, and supported. So I apply for this college campus. I apply for this college, show up for first day of school, and I don't see that stuff. I don't see them. Okay, I don't see that representation. It's a bait and switch, if you will. Now think about it, it's a bait and switch. The point is, that would be just one example of tokenism. So you might be wondering, well, Sheldon, did you take the picture? No, I didn't take the picture. And the reason why I didn't take the picture, honestly, the reason why I didn't take the picture was, one, I told him, I was looking, hey man, I'm not even a student. So he's like, oh, are you a staff member? He thought I was a coach, right? Because that's always the next thing. Is I usually get someone thinks I'm some sort of basketball, football coach or something like that. So he said, oh, if you're not a student here, then you must be an athlete or you must be a coach. And I said, no, I'm here actually touring your campus. I'm not a student. I'm not a staff member. I'm not a stakeholder in that sense. But at that moment, I didn't really think about it until later. When we're thinking about tokenism, I didn't think about it until later. I was like, this person literally grabbed me out the blue to provide that representation. Now, I would take the picture, go on about my business, and then some poor, unsuspecting student, maybe a student of color, sees a picture of me in that pamphlet and believes that this is the representation or a representation of what the school has to offer, and they're going to be disappointed when they show up and it's not there. Okay, so that's just one example of tokenism. But here's the thing: tokenization objectifies the individual and effectively strips them of their individuality, reduces them to a prop based on their skin color, gender, etc. It robs them of their voice. All of these factors become valuable assets in the business of advertising and raising the profiles of schools and companies. It benefits the organization. However, it doesn't benefit the individual. And like I said, I believe this is a classic example of what a bait and switch can look like. We're going to talk about, in this session, we're going to talk about the mental health effects that this has on individuals, how this looks, and so let's break it down some more. All right, so that's just a little bit of what it could look like, but let's dig into this a little bit more. Okay, so some further examples of what tokenism in schools could look like. Well, make sure it's a little bit bigger so you can see that here. Let me put myself in the corner. All right. Another example of what tokenism could look like in schools is editing curriculum by simply changing names to ethnic sounding names. All right, you get your word problems. I'm a math teacher. I want to be culturally responsive, and so I'm going to do this. And so what I'm going to do is, rather than saying Mary and Michael, I'm going to say Jamal. I'm going to say Jamal and Lucretia. Okay, so Lucretia has 5 apples and Jamal has 10 apples. If we put them all in the basket, how many apples do they have together? Okay, changing the curriculum just to show. Oh, again, we're going to provide these ethnic sounding names, Jose and Juan and all these Miguel and all these names. Let's just throw those into our word problems. Now we're culturally responsive. Now we're providing, a diverse word pool, those kind of things, that mindset. Okay. Now, it's not just limited to just how we might edit just some names, it also extends into our racial slurs. So you think about those quote unquote classics, your Huckleberry Finns, To Kill a Mockingbirds. I legit had an educator one time ask me, "Oh, can I change the N word to African American?" I said, "Absolutely not. Do not do that." Right. But that would be another way, right? Oh, okay. I want to bring this text into the classroom, or this, again, considered a classic. And so I need to provide this information to my students. But I do recognize that the terms or the words that are referred to certain people, specifically certain individuals of color, oh, we don't say Negro leagues anymore. We don't say Negro. So rather than saying the Negro League, I'm going to change it to the African American League. No. Okay. That would be another example. All right, let's go even further. Okay. Because I'm glad y'all asked. Well, what other examples are there? What else could it look like in schools? All right, I'll give you some more. This is a classic one. When we talk about this one all the time, those quote unquote tokenized holidays, special events. We literally pack up all of our indigenous curriculum, put it into November, Native American Heritage Month. Or we save everything, all our African American stuff, all our black stuff, save for February. Or Pride Month. We do this for Asian Pacific Islander Month. Like, we do these things, we save all of our, like, because I don't have enough, right? I don't have enough. And so I save everything for those 30 days, 28 days. Save it all for those times. And then that's it. What happens on day 31? What happens on the next month, right when March starts? St. Patrick's Day. Boom. Ready to go. Okay. Tokenize opportunities. All right. Now, here's the thing, because I'm gonna throw the caveat out here, because I'm saying this now, but I do think it's important to address or to do this awareness. However, this should not be the only day or the only time period that we're discussing these things. Okay. Which will lead me to my next point. Sometimes we wait to those cultural months or those special holidays and we show only information and content and only discuss things from a what? Oppressive standpoint. All right. So even though we have our quote unquote multicultural day, or we're teaching on multicultural lesson, but we're showing all that information, the cultural side of things, from a condescending, primitive, maybe even exotic standpoint. Okay. We talk about the historical figures. However, again, those historical figures are the acceptable ones. These are the ones that we're okay with teaching y'all about. I might get a little controversial, but I'm just saying, Rosa Parks is often a very common one that we hear a lot in our schools. We talk about Dr. King. Those are a lot of things that you can expect every year to hear about. Maybe even George Washington Carver. I was teaching a class. I've been teaching a class this summer, and someone asked me, and one of my students asked me about Malcolm X. We were talking about different things, and I said, and they had absolutely they've heard of the name, but they didn't know who Malcolm X was. And I had to have a conversation with him. I said, see, that's a challenge. Unfortunately, Malcolm X probably wasn't talked about a lot in your school. Maybe it was a little paragraph, but you got a lot of information about Dr. King. And I believe it's very important that if we're going to teach about various cultures, various communities, we can't always limit it to just the ones that are quote unquote acceptable. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, Dr. King unfortunately was assassinated. And when we think about the work that he did and the work that Dr. King did and the work that Malcolm X did, and also other and those are I would argue those are two um civil rights leaders that we talk about maybe but there's so many others, right? But if we're only teaching about historical figures that had to do with, abolitionism, civil rights, or other race related issues, that's the only time we discuss individuals of color or various identities that are outside of the dominant culture's perspective, and it's always about some sort of civil rights or race related, that would be tokenism. Okay, well, let's talk about what our books could look like. Oh, we just added all these diverse books into our library, but there's no plan. Right? You literally Googled or you went to diversebooks.com or something like that. You ordered a bunch, and as you ordered a bunch of books, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just a checkbox. Oh yeah, now we have we're excited because we have an extra 100 books written by individuals of color. Okay, but there's no maybe all those books are only about race. Okay, that's the only conversations happening in those books. They're literally diverse books about books written by people of color about diversity, and that's it. Um, the other thing sometimes that we see when it comes to tokenism, for my folks with individuals with disabilities, for example, you know, all the conversations, all the curriculum content that we present in regards to our individuals with disabilities only come from some sort of conquering adversity standpoint. There's just they're existing, they're living and they're surviving. They have whatever this individual has no legs and they were able to climb a mountain. Like we everything's on some sort of triumph, and there's nothing beyond that. So you might be saying, well, those are great things to we need to talk about those things. And I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. We do need to discuss all of these things. However, that is often the only thing that's discussed. And we don't go beyond that. The other one is, and this happens a lot. This happens to me a lot here in Idaho, expecting individuals to represent their identities. You're in the classroom, there's one or two students, a handful of kids that represent a certain identity. Teacher calls them out. Hey, what do you think? Or what do your folks think about what's going on in our country right now? Or what are your thoughts on this or that that's related to your identity? As if they speak for the entire community. Right? Those are challenges. This happened to me lots of times. Okay. Also, well, I already said singling out, pointing out individuals as well. Which leads me to my next point. We should also discuss the word minority. Here's why I'm saying this. I looked up tokenism, definition of tokenism. It was very hard for me to find a definition of tokenism without the word minority in there. Now you might utilize that in your everyday language as well. I'm gonna tell you, like, this is why I believe that we need to unpack this for just a moment. The term minority does not account for one's family, friends, relationships, group membership, neighborhood, etc. Okay, let me get a little bit more about this. Right, if you look up the definition of minority, and I'm paraphrasing, but Merriam-Webster, Dictionary.com, whoever is going to say something such as less than the majority, right? Less than. But what happens And it's usually referred to people of color or certain, certain groups of people, right? But what happens in certain neighborhoods, for example? We know our neighborhoods are typically, or there's a lot of segregated neighborhoods. We know that in a lot of our schools are segregated as well. So if I'm a school, and let's say 90% of the student population in this school is of color, yet they would still often, in a lot of people's circles, be referred to as minorities. That's why I say it doesn't account for friends, relationships, right? If I got a lot of homies and I identify as black. So if all my friends are black, not a gang or a minority group, like no, everybody's like we're all black folks. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense to me to utilize that term. Now, I think the other way to look at it is not being a minority, but being someone who has been historically minoritized, more of a verb, as opposed to it being a descriptor, an adjective. That makes sense. Okay. We think about affinity groups. A lot of our schools have a Black Student Union. They have all these different, there's a lot of legislation out there that's looked at to pass laws to where funding can't go to quote unquote minority organizations or groups. But again, in those spaces, they are the majority. In those spaces, they're not the minority. So who there's that famous quote, minority to who? Right? But again, that is a term that I don't utilize the term minority anymore because I get it. To me, it comes with a negative connotation, and it doesn't really make sense when you think about it from a larger scale. When you think about who we tend to hang around, we tend to hang around folks that look like us, especially if we have that choice. We tend to engage like our families, those kind of things in our neighborhood situations, church, organizations, community events, not minorities, right? They're often in the majority or it's just us, those kind of things. I'm gonna get a little bit more because this is in our news, right? We see this headlines, right? I did a good again. I was searching for the term tokenism, and everything had minority in it, and it was just really hard to find a definition without that word in it. But you see a lot of major news stations or major news avenues utilize this majority minority term. Majority minority doesn't make sense to me. How is it that 98%, 51, let's just call it 51, right? That's majority. Let's call it 51% of color, they're still being referred to as minorities. Right? Majority minority doesn't make sense. But I found several articles, and sadly, some of these articles are written by people of color being referred to. I don't utilize the term. Okay. Minority majority schools offer students opportunities. Minority majority. I mean, this is as of 2021. You got 2023, April, a couple months ago. School board votes to close Just Elementary in West Tampa, and they talking about it being a majority minority school. Doesn't make any sense to me. Okay. So that's why I think we need to talk about the term minority, and that's why I don't utilize the term minority anymore. I prefer maybe I'll I just sometimes I just say black or brown, whatever, whatever the race or the main, I might say it that way. I might say historically underserved, underrepresented, or minoritized people of color. It just kind of depends on the situation. But I don't utilize the term minority as a description. All right, let's talk about the effects of tokenism. Let me bring my slides back up so y'all can see this. All right, the effects of tokenism. What is that? What can happen in school? Well, at the end of the day, part of the effects of tokenism is that it's a penalty. The penalty for being different. Now, well-intentioned educators and staff members thinking that again we're assuming everybody's doing their best, but often it's a failed attempt at culturally responsive practices. Right? This is that, you're teaching a lesson and you say, by the way, your folks or this group of people, I was reading an article earlier today. There's this book called White Tiger, and it's about an Indian family. And, this one student, former student who graduated from a certain school, she was recounting how every year or that one year she was one of I think she was like the Indian student at that school, and they read White Tiger and how she felt. To the outside, to others who did not have that identity, oh, this is great. We're learning about a brand new culture. But what happened to that young child? Well, she got a bunch of questions about Indian culture. She was thrown into the mix of being the representative. I've had conversations with my class with peers who maybe they were born in the United States, but within a class they could reflect back to a time when there was a lesson being taught that represented their identity, and they had never been to their home country. They had never been. Maybe they didn't even speak the language, but they were still called upon to teach a holiday. What do y'all what have you celebrated this holiday? Tell us about the holiday, or tell us about this food cuisine. How does it taste? I don't know. Never had it. So sometimes it's a failed attempt at culturally responsive practices. Tokenism also can end up being a shortcut due to I didn't have time to address my students' needs. So I'm just gonna call them out real quick, or I'm just gonna I'm just gonna wait till February. I just don't have time to embed multiculturalism throughout the school year. So as a result, I'll just wait till those special times. Sadly, on the student side, tokenism often creates an implicit or an explicit prejudice amongst each other. Think about it. If I'm a student and all I hear about let's say my classmate has a certain identity that's different than mine, and every time I hear about my classmate's identity, it's always coming from an oppressive, a negative standpoint, trying to get over adversity, race related. That's the only time I hear about their identity. It's from my identity seems to be the dominant identity, and your identity seems to always be just trying to get equal rights or civil rights or whatever it is. What type of prejudice, again, implicitly, and we could even go as far as saying explicitly, that creates amongst peers? Again, unintentionally. We're going to assume unintentionally. Lastly, it negatively impacts students outside of the embracing culture. You got to look back on a couple of videos when I talked about embracing culture, the assimilation process that we tend to do when it comes to creating a sense of belonging. Oh, you can belong within our community as long as you follow the norms. It's okay for you to be different, but you can't be different here. We'll accept that you dress a little different, your hair is a little different, but you can't do that here. You can do it at home. You can do it in your neighborhood, but not in the classroom, not in the hallways. The embracing culture. So it negatively, at the end of the day, impacts the embracing culture. But sadly, there's even more research that talks about not only does it, again, penalize our students for being different, but it also impacts their mental health. So what does that mean? And I'm going to add in my staff folks as well. Because one of the things about sense of belonging, it does extend to our adults, right? It extends to our principals, our administrators. It extends to higher ed as well, right? You're a faculty member, you're a staff member. Again, I'm a black man living in Idaho and working out here. I can tell you some stories. So let's talk about the mental health side of things. And again, not just for our kids, but also for adults as well. Okay. Attrition. You got students that, you know what? You got adults that say, you know what, this ain't for me. School ain't for me, or this campus, this high school, this middle school, I'm leaving. I'm gonna find another job. Or I'm gonna drop out of school. Feelings of isolation. Not really feeling like, again, not feeling like you belong. Or feeling accepted into the space that you're in. You know, what am I going to talk about? I don't have anybody to talk to. I don't have anything to talk about. Or every time I do try to say something, this happens. I end up being spotlighted. You know, overly nice to just someone just going out. Like, you don't treat everybody the same. Like, you're not treating all your other friends and colleagues this way. Why are you talking to me this way? Okay. Uh, I remember saying this once. Sometimes I would walk into a space and I legit felt like I was the main attraction at a zoo or the circus, where like just all the focus, all the attention, the spotlight is on me. And I'm being called upon to ask for my opinions, black culture, black matters, whatever it is. I always say, well, this is my opinion. This is what I think. This is what I feel, but I don't speak for the entire community. So I might have a sense of a feeling of isolation, not belonging in that sense, or the opposite, which is being in the spotlight. There's also the erasure. Maybe I'm not feeling validated for who I am, or feeling as if I do try to represent myself or my identity, I'm going to be shunned. So I just go throughout, navigate life or navigate this space, this environment, and totally leave my identity at the door. It's erased. My opinions don't seem to matter. My unique background experiences don't seem to matter. Imagine the toll that can place on one's mental health, which can lead to exhaustion and stress. We had to keep in mind our kids, we don't know what they have going on at home. They could be dealing with all kind of stress from the house side. The least they can get, the bare minimum when they come to our schools should be safety. And then they got to deal with exhaustion and stress at school because they got to deal with microaggressions on a daily basis, multiple times. What about being pigeonholed? So let's just say I'm transgender. Right? I'm a transgender staff member. Let's say I'm a transgender staff member or student. And I'm expected to lead up the transgender affinity group or to do a professional development on the topic. And that's the only thing I'm asked to do. I could be a stellar English teacher. I could be an awesome math student. But those skills are not recognized. They're not acknowledged because my identity seems to be more important. And that's the only thing I'm capable of doing in that person's eyes. I could do a lot of other stuff. I know a lot of things. However, I'm pigeonholed. Y'all remember Urkel? Y'all remember Urkel? Jaleel White? You know, I remember watching an article or interview of him one time, and he basically said he had a really hard time finding work after the show Family Matters because everybody kept seeing Urkel. Like every time he tried to do his mannerisms, facial expressions, It just always reminded directors and potential casting folks as his character, a fictional character, Steve Urkel. So are we doing that to our staff and our students? Oh, they have this identity. There's a small amount of individuals with that identity. Oh, we'll just have that person do it every time. And that's literally all. Now, again, I want to be very clear. It's great to highlight things. And if that individual is willing to do it, that's great as well. But if that's the only thing or the only time you want to hear from them, you're not giving them other opportunities. They're pigeonholed. That's where the challenges come in with tokenism. What else we got? The need to be on guard. Again, microaggressions are a thing. I should do a session on microaggressions. Put that on my list. But the need to always be on guard. Well, what's somebody going to say this time? I remember I used to work for a high school. I used to go to a high school, and literally every time I went to the high school, I came home with a story to tell. It got to the point where I would have anxiety and stressed out because, oh man, I look at my calendar. Man, I got to go to this one high school. I already know I'm going to have an issue. And I constantly, like, I would walk to that door on guard because I knew I was going to have to deal with something. Never failed. Even times when I thought, okay, I've made it more than half the day. Nothing's happened. Been good. I'll be about ready to leave, and then boom, somebody hits me with some microaggressions, some nonsense. Dang it. I thought I was gonna get out of here scot-free. Always had a story to tell. All right. I told you I was gonna give you some strategies. So let's start wrapping things up with some how to remove tokenism. Okay, what does that look like if we're trying to remove tokenism? One, this needs to be a school-wide approach. Again, we're talking about sense of belonging. I'm talking to this from a school-wide perspective. This is not just a one classroom that you're one person of color or you're one person that has an identity that's doing this work. No, this is an approach that should be a school-wide approach and not just looking at, I mean, you're looking at everything. Okay, you're looking at your representation from your staff. You're looking at your curriculum. We talked about what that could look like. It's intentional. It's not just go buy a bunch of books written by people of color. Be intentional. Are those books of from people of color, are they having conversations or topics outside of just racial topics? Diversity. You buy diversity books and they only talk about diversity, or diverse authors and they only talk about diversity. Okay. Are you being intentional with your approach? Extend to your teaching. Multicultural teaching, not your one and dones, not your tokenized holidays and months. You're looking at your policies within your handbook, our dress codes. Are dress codes being an issue? Are your hairstyles, all those things, are they penalizing individuals? And then also, again, looking at your overall culture in your school. Someone said my mic is, are you not able to hear me? Let me know if you can't hear me. The next one is an emphasis on all students. Okay. Again, if we tokenize kids, that means we're putting a lot of emphasis on one individuality. And we're not helping our students and our classmates understand to appreciate each other. Okay. It's okay to have differences, but if we hone in too much on differences, then we can isolate our kids. But if we don't acknowledge or help our students to feel empowered that are different, then we might end up erasing their culture. So there's that line that you need to be on. Okay. But at the end of the day, you need to put emphasis on all students. And the last one is to pay attention to the taxation and erasure. We talked about erasure, where again, a child or a staff member does not feel as if they are in a identity safe environment. Okay. The taxation is that invisible labor. Okay. Someone's bilingual, you're making them do all the translating. Child has to translate between parent and teacher, or you're a teacher, but you have to do all these additional, you're the advisor of these various affinity groups, you're the DI person, all these different things, you're doing all these jobs and tasks, you're not getting paid for it. That taxation, the invisible assignments, and again, not being able to feel like you're in an identity safe environment. Okay. Final thoughts. One thing that I want us to consider, which I think at the end of the day that sums up kind of today's topic, the importance of understanding the difference between acknowledgement and empowerment. Okay, the difference between acknowledgement. So acknowledging students marginal at best. Oh, we call them out to be, you're the representative of our diversity group. You're the representative or the leader of our affinity group. That's it. Or, again, we're talking from a text standpoint in our curriculum. Oh, well, here's a little side paragraph, or here, by the way, this community or this group of people. And then, sometimes we go as far as actually pointing to individual students. Hey, you don't love page 38. We're talking about your folks on page 38. Right? Acknowledgement versus empowerment. Listening to your students, having high expectations for them, and trusting that they are capable of teaching you and that they're willing to learn from you as well. But we're not spotlighting folks and just, okay, this is at one time, this is at one, once a year type of event. No, we're going way beyond that. And our students are feeling empowered. And it goes beyond the acknowledgement. That's all I got for you today. If you are not subscribed to the show, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Coming out. I won't be here next week. Next week I'll be out of I'm traveling. I'll be at St. Louis Public Schools doing some work out there. I'm going to actually, that reminds me, again, if you would like for me to come work for you, do some trainings, workshops, keynotes, presentations, that's my information. But please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. We'll be back the week after. So not next Thursday, but the week after next week, Thursday, I'll be back. Remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.